Okay, I think we might make a start if we're ready, Esther. So welcome to everybody to this LERU briefing. My name is David Bogle. I'm Vice Provost of the Doctoral School and Early Career Researchers at University College London, but I'm here really in my role as chair of the Doctoral Studies Policy Group for LERU, League of European Research Universities. And we're here to launch this paper on supervision. I'll introduce people and as we go along. Let me just mention that this is a paper from the Doctoral Studies Policy Group. We have the two lead authors on the screen here, Helke and Claudine. Helke Hillebrand and Claudine Lesinger. I'll introduce those in a bit. This is actually the fourth of, I've been chair of this Doctoral Studies Policy Group for quite a number of years, 10 years or so now. And this is the fourth of a series of papers we've had. We had one, Doctoral Degrees Beyond 2010, Training Talented Researchers for Society. And we followed a few years, that was in about 2010, 2011. Then Good Practice in Doctoral Education a few years later, showing some of the, how we put some of these things in practice. And then in 2018, Maintaining a Quality Culture in Doctoral Education at Research-Intensive Universities. So this one was a very important one about this very key topic of doctoral supervision and how we see the best way of doing this. So we will then have the presentations from the two lead authors. We'll have a brief question and answer session, then a series of presentations from responders from a panel, as you will see, I think, on the briefing. And then we'll have a debate and an opportunity for question and answer. So can I ask you, if you've got questions, at any stage, put them in the Q&A, which is down the bottom of your, should be down the bottom of your screen. And those questions will be brought to me by the team, the LERU team backstage, and I will then address the questions in some sort of order to the two lead authors and to the members of the panel. So with that, I'll welcome you again, and let me hand over now to Kurt de Ketelera, who's the Chief Executive of the League of European Research Universities. Kurt.
Thank you very much, David, for the introduction, and good morning to everybody out there. I think that we have something like 500 registrations for this event, which is, of course, fantastic. And you see that the outreach that you can realize with doing something online is certainly it's certainly much bigger than do something in Brussels to launch a paper or something like that. So very welcome at this event. Perhaps start off with saying a few words about LERU, because I'm not sure if all those 500 out there know what LERU is about. So the League of European Research Universities is a group of 23 leading research-intensive universities in Europe. And with this group, we try to promote on a daily basis the interests of frontier research, education, and innovation in the countries where we are active, but also at the level of the European Union, at the level of the United Nations. You heard it very well. I said 23 leading research-intensive universities in Europe, because we are not limited to the European Union. We have 7 members outside the European Union, 5 in the UK and 2 in Switzerland. Of course, we hope that all 7 of them very soon will, through the association of both countries, be part of the European research area again, and will be able to participate as in the past in the framework of EU-funded research and innovation. Yesterday was a great day, which has created a lot of hope that the UK soon will be able to associate to the framework program. I know I shouldn't become too enthusiastic because there are still some ifs and do's and don'ts to be realized in the following days and weeks. But I'm very glad that we, with LERU, never gave up on this, and that we kept on pushing over the past years in order to make sure that all colleagues in the UK, and I'm sure also in the future in Switzerland, will be able to participate again with us in the framework program. If you look at the European Union in particular, and that's a good occasion with this paper today, I just mentioned ERA, the European Research Area. It's clear that doctoral training and also the issue that we tackled today, doctoral supervision, hasn't only been for LERU a very important topic from the early days of LERU on 20 years ago, but it's also a very important topic policy-wise for the EU and for the countries which function under the umbrella of EU research and innovation policy. If you look at the ERA Action Plan 2022-2024, we see there that in Action 4, attractive and sustainable research careers are one of the key priorities for the following years in the European research policy. And it's clear that the paper that we present today on doctoral supervision is a topic which is, of course, a very important element in making sure that the people that are making a PhD within our institutions get an attractive and sustainable research career. As David already indicated in his intro, with LERU we have done over the past 20 years several papers on aspects of doctoral training. It's clear that for us this is core business, because obviously through this doctoral training we make sure that we produce, by way of speaking, the future societal leaders. And it's absolutely key for us that this is done in a correct, attractive, and sustainable way. I'm very grateful to the doctoral training group within LERU, led by David, and in particular to Helke and to Claudine, who are the lead authors of the paper that we present here today. Many thanks for this fantastic job. For everybody out there, I can say already now that the paper will be available online after the event here this morning, and that also the event itself is recorded so that we can also have a look at it again after today. You will find everything on LERU's website. So with this short introduction, David, I think that I can suffice and that we can go to the main part of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kurt. So now to our two main speakers to present this paper, LERU's view on holistic doctoral supervision. We have Helke Hillebrand, who's the director of the Graduate Academy at the University of Heidelberg, and Claudine Lesinger, who's head of the graduate campus at the University of Zurich, both members of the steering committee of the LERU Doctoral Studies Policy Group. So without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I will take over and share my screen. Thank you very much, David and Kurt, for this introduction. So we will divide our presentation to show that this has been a collaborative piece of work really that we did, Helke and me as lead authors, but also very much relying on the help of all the members from the LERU Policy Group on Doctoral Studies. So first of all, we would like to say a big thank you, a heartfelt thank you to all the members of the Doctoral Studies Policy Group. It was really a joint effort. It was one of our former group members who put the topic on our agenda. And it was really something that everybody in the group embraced fully and was really very excited about to contribute to the literature out there on supervision by having an emphasis really on a forward-looking and aspirational way, and to reflect the visionary practices that we can find already at our institutions. And we then used actually very efficient Zoom meetings, breakout sessions to develop the core tenets of the paper. And really the propositions of this paper really reflect the collaborative approach that we chose. So that we really wanted to have all the different viewpoints, all the different institutions present in our paper. And once we had this first solid draft, we then sent it out to the larger LERU community, and Helke and I presented it at the Rectors Assembly in Munich, and we are very grateful for all the feedback that we got throughout this consultative process. It really made the paper better, and so really a big thank you to all of you for all the help. So finally, firstly, really not finally, we want to set the scene for this kind of productive doctoral supervision that we're aiming to describe in the paper. We really believe that doctoral researchers should be supported in the most holistic fashion possible. And this is really kind of, we will develop that throughout the paper, but it's really about taking into consideration all the different aspects and situate that in a very appreciative culture. And with this, we really want to facilitate the growth of doctoral researchers into future leaders, and really, as Kurt said, make these attractive and sustainable research careers, like be the beginning of those research careers. And we, in this doctoral studies group, one of the big tenets that we have is it's about the person and fostering a biography, and it's not just about producing a dissertation. So really for us, it's very important to have all that appreciation go into shaping the future leaders that will be inside as well as outside academia, because let's face it, most of our doctoral researchers end up outside academia. So we also see that this holistic doctoral supervision that will probably take cultural change within the institutions, and we are very much aware that it needs to be in sync with all the institutions' local conditions, visions, and structure. We do not believe that there should be some kind of top-down mandate, but rather it should be adapted to the culture of the discipline, to the culture of the institution, and also include many bottom-up initiatives. And another important scene setter is really the communication. We see that all the stakeholders need to do their share and have or follow an appreciative culture of communication. And finally, another important element of setting the scene is that we see the training of supervisors as a chance for every institution to teach the supervisors about the institution's core and culture value. So we see it really as a onboarding for new staff. With this paper, we aimed to create awareness among research-intensive universities for their responsibility, really, to nurture an appropriate culture for successful supervision. We really see this as an important task of research-intensive universities, because the doctoral degree is really a differentiator for these. And supervision is really very much the central aspect of doctoral education. So by highlighting that, and by writing a paper about our forward-looking aspirational way of doing supervision, we really wanted to also make sure that everybody is quite aware about this central aspect of doctoral education. And also, of course, the crucial role that then the research-based universities play in doctoral education. And so now we've been working many years to improve the framework conditions for the doctorate. Really, it moved in the last 20 years from this master to apprentice learning approach to a more structured learning process. And it's now time, we thought, that we bring into focus also the best practices of supervision that we've been seeing at the different institutions. And so we really want to present the know-how and principles from LERU institutions that foster good practice in supervision. So you will see in the paper a lot of good practice examples. We also want to nurture the culture for mutually productive supervision and training of supervisory skills, because we believe that it's really about, it is a mutually productive relationship, and it can be trained by, and of course, we also see that by leveraging the potential of beneficial supervision, we can really make a difference in this knowledge-based society. We, like the universities, the research-based universities we were talking about. And so we want to produce forward-looking principles that aim to inspire other higher education institutions when they develop their own conditions for successful doctoral education. And we also, particularly, we really are putting the individual in the center. So let me continue with the key components that we see for holistic supervision. Again, we see doctoral researchers as the future leaders in all sectors of societal relevance. We really see the need that we train them appropriately so they can develop all their potential out there. And that begins with clear expectation management from the very beginning. So we really believe expectation management should already be part of recruitment, and recruitment should also be thought of as the very beginning of supervision. So everything starts there, and even expectation management, of course, has to be developed throughout the whole supervision process. And another key element is the positive institutional culture that we're talking about, this very culture of appreciation, where we, on the one hand, appreciate all the efforts that are being done in that supervisory process of all the stakeholders, but also kind of like this culture of appreciation in communication and in all the actions that we do. And also the structural conditions need to be beneficial. So we've seen a lot of very beneficial structural conditions being developed out there. And now we also encourage that these become very much part of the whole supervisory process, and that they really also put in the center. That's not just about conducting the research and attaining examples and publishing papers, but it's also about this whole development of this person, and it needs all the different actors involved. And we also believe that even though research assessment now considers supervision quite a bit, we believe it should be even addressed in a more qualitative way, and it should be not just about the numbers of people that the person has supervised, but also about the way they do it and how they reflect about the whole process. And we also want to create awareness among the supervisors that they also have a part. It's also part their responsibility in the relationship, and they have to work on it as well. And finally, we believe that exactly this kind of relationship where both are asked to do their share, they also should be training opportunities for both sides, for supervisors as well as supervisees, so that they can excel and improve. So this is now my first part, and I'm really happy to give over to Helke, who will continue with the presentation.
Thank you very much, Claudine, and everybody for having us. All of what Claudine presented as a key components of what we think will contribute to holistic, best possible supervision needs a home. It needs a home base to grow and to develop. And we think the research university as the one that leads by example on how to set the scene for a next quantum leap in improving the process of producing, in quotation marks, researchers and good science. That really lies within the universities, and they are the ones to set the scene for best practice in supervision. And lots has been done for improving the doctoral case over the last 10, 20 years. And also in the kind introduction by David and Kurt, we heard a lot about the things that have been achieved in the past. And we think that going forward with an emphasis and focus on supervision is one of the next big steps towards also playing the role or fostering the role of universities as trendsetters for societal growth. And there we think the contribution of the university is to really take a leading role by offering a comprehensive and motivational onboarding of newly hired staff to set the scene for what their cultural environment should look like towards best practice application of supervision. And why do we talk about the onboarding of newly hired staff? It's important to get the message out to everybody, but we think that it's easier to start probably with those who are coming in freshly, because they are the ones who have to adapt to the place they will be working in as first ones, and to pick up those messages towards the improvement procedure for which we would like to set the support with our paper. We think that the university is a key player as the one who sets the scene towards providing transparency on rules and guidelines, but not only by having rules and guidelines that need to be followed. So we make a clear point out of the fact that all of rules and guidelines are unnecessary or helpless if not followed up by, but we very clearly think that those guidelines and rules inside each individual university need to provide for individual space to live the concept and also the individual culture of all universities, and that there needs to be a common point at which everybody meets towards understanding what a holistic concept of good supervision takes to put it into practice. And part of putting it into practice, we believe, with long discussions also in our group, is supervisory training actually at all career stages. This is not supervisory training only for the supervisors, although very important, and has also large space for further growth, but it also includes supervisory training for those who are about to be supervised, so that the expectation management between the two groups becomes transparent and helps each part in a tandem to play its role to the best possible way. There's a lot of service on each of our campuses and each and any of the campuses of research universities around the world, where there is a share between a lot of career advice, a lot of pastoral care, course providers like the graduate centers who take care of the graduate theme as such. And we believe that it is helpful to strengthen the role and visibility of all of these service providers on campus to make sure that all of the players inside the university who can contribute to the process of improving the research experience are seen and are used to the best possible level. And therefore, it is so crucial for the aim we are proposing with the paper that all of our universities support this vision by communicating a clear vision on the institution's leadership culture. We believe that there's a lot of bottom-up work that can be supported by the whole university community, but we also postulate that the institution's leadership culture is the one who sets the scene from the top to make sure that in every corner of any university it's visible what the leadership culture expects from good supervision towards making the doctoral experience a positive and forward-looking one to help flourish also with a future career inside or outside university. Claudine? Thank you. So, having said this, we postulated a number of core messages. They will not replace you to go through the paper in detail, but to give you even a better flavor on why you should read it. I mentioned already our plea for a consistent and realistic expectation management between all stakeholders, meaning coming to the truth, no matter how beneficial, or no, beneficial is the wrong word, how positive or also sometimes painful it could be. It's important to have the right language and to have the communication skills to do this expectation management, as Claudine alluded to previously, but to be very clear on what can be expected from a supervisor, what is expected from a supervisee, what is expected in terms of research quality, what is expected in terms of engagement, of bringing in own ideas and expertise and accepting feedback from others is crucial for a beneficial supervisory procedure that leads to the wished for result. And all stakeholders feel appreciated and seen in this process. And that starts actually on the level of professional recruitment, where it's all about fostering a diversity-friendly and inclusive environment for research and training. And this first step in recruitment builds on proper expectation management, meaning if the recruitment is gotten right, the dropout rate and the level of frustration that may occur throughout the doctoral procedure will be minimized. All of this takes time and resources and energy, and therefore we are very adamant on hoping for proper recognition of supervision responsibilities as part of formal performance assessment. Many things are expected from supervisors, and many are rewarded and counted and also shown in Excel sheets. We think that the recognition of supervision responsibilities currently has a lot of opportunity to grow, and we think it should be part of formal assessments in order to be honored properly. And there's even more ways to honor it properly, and we are hoping for great ideas, further rewards, and more visibility for supervision activity in the future. We think we have seen across our universities that broadening the responsibilities for the supervision is much helped by establishing supervisory teams. So not having the classical apprenticeship model that Claudine alluded to earlier as well, but to make sure that the team approach is really considered, and that basically the risk of something going wrong also in a relationship is buffered by having more people involved. We call for trustworthy communication between all stakeholders. I think this became apparent by what I said before. And we think throughout the process, it's important that we have a benevolent eye, and that we monitor and foster the well-being of our doctoral researchers towards making sure that we do not only assess papers and scientific productivity, but that we make sure that all of this is based on a benevolent environment that helps for personal growth. In order to prepare the doctoral researchers for their next steps in career inside and outside academia with their academic training in their backpack, we like to encourage for more metadisciplinary skills training to make use of the infrastructures available, and to also have a good portion of metadisciplinary skills training that helps to develop leadership skills, supervisory skills, and teamwork skills. An important step towards this plea is that the recognition of the relevance of support structures is helped and increases by the embedding in the communication procedures we mentioned, and that also from all sides, from those infrastructures, from the university leadership, but also from the direct supervisors, the relevance of these support structures and their availability become more visible. And last but not least, we see this only to very different extents realized across the continent. And both Claudine and I, we are coming from the classical environment where this is not yet achieved, that there is a clear separation of the supervision process from thesis evaluation, and in a best case scenario, also from the employment conditions. So to speak, to have more transparency and independency of all levels. So in a nutshell, our plea really is empathic leadership, availability of all involved in the process, and taking the responsibility that characterizes, or that is the basis for good supervision and good interaction, characterizes the good practice in supervision. With this, I'd like to distill our core message into an even smaller nutshell. We as LERU University representatives propose the nurturing of an improved institutional culture, a culture of appreciation that is characterized by effective communication and reliable expectation management towards a more impactful and consistent supervision process. And we figured that our final conclusion is truly intuitive. We are very pleased to have Maresi Nerat with us on the panel discussion, who figured our conclusion, number one, that it takes a village to raise a PhD, within one of her earlier papers in Acta Academia out of South Africa back in 2011 already, claiming a global village approach to oppose the classical apprenticeship model. And we are very grateful for having her here. And we all had to smile when we realized that we were really thinking alike along those lines. And we think that within this village that raises a PhD, it at the end still takes two to tango to make the supervisory relationship a successful one. Yeah, and with this, we are at the end of our presentation. I will add to the thank you message that Claudine had at the beginning. Thank you to everybody who supported us, who acted as our village to get to the paper. And yeah, thank you for being here and listening to us.
Thank you very much, Helke and Claudine. That was great. So we're pretty much on time. We've got a couple of questions. The first one was about a specific question about recruitment. Is this referring to recruitment of supervisors or to recruitment of doctoral candidates also?
Shall I?
Yep.
Sorry. It refers actually to both. And I think there is a lot already on the level of the recruitment of professors or supervisors along the lines. But we think that equal intensity has to be given to the process of recruiting the doctoral candidates. That is a reliability and a responsibility towards appreciating the wish and the audaciousness of a young person to put all of his or her talents into one basket with one person or a small group of persons towards getting their career track started off the ground. And I think if somebody is ready to come into this game, he or she deserves being given the outlook on what's going to happen, and also being recruited carefully towards the expectations of the hiring party in order to make sure that there is a best possible fit and no disappointment coming, because it's a young career at stake if the recruitment process has failed.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's go on to the next one. This is about supervisory training. Most doctoral education professionals would love mandatory supervisor training, but it's a touchy subject, training academics, as we've discussed many times. At which obligation should there be the obligation? National regulations based on EU positions, university policies, or doctoral school rules? Claudine, perhaps you want to...
Yeah, so I believe, again, mandatory is something that we discuss quite a bit. Remember, David,
Yeah.
it really depends also kind of on the institution. And you know, there's people saying when you decide you want to have mandatory training, then you force people into courses that, you know, might not be enthusiastic about taking them, and the course itself might suffer from that. So, and also then again, you could also think that mandatory training for experienced supervisors is not very appreciative in itself. So there's like all these different aspects we have to take into consideration. I believe all the institutions have to decide for themselves what path to go. But for me, the absolute minimum would be mandatory for newly hired staff as a kind of onboarding and teaching them about the institution's culture values. And that, I believe, should be coming from the central, from the central management, and not from the different like doctoral programs or graduate schools or faculties. But this should be kind of like a course that is offered by university management, so that newly hired staff know what the culture of the university is about. So I hope I answered the question, but I'm not sure if I missed parts of it.
I might just add that different countries have very different approaches to the regulation of doctoral studies. So this is the sort of thing that varies quite a bit between different countries. Certainly in my country, in the UK, we mandated, well, actually, that wasn't true. It was started by the quality QA, Quality Assurance Agency, but it, saying you should do this, but then in the end, we as UCL introduced mandatory supervisor training about 15 plus years ago. Okay, next one. So this is, perhaps you can be brief at this one because it's, a lot of this is in the paper. So rather than go into a lot of detail now, but as the questioner asked, difficult to ask without having seen the question. I'm curious about metrics recommended by us when assessing. Some can be quantitative, numbers to completion, numbers of years, but many are much more qualitative, quality of supervision, empathy, and I'm personally struggling to quantify good characteristics. Now, I know there's quite a lot about this in the paper, but I don't know if you wanted to say something just briefly, one of you.
Very briefly.
Yeah.
We discussed a lot about this as well, as reflected in the paper. And we believe it's not only about a snapshot as of today, throughout the supervisory process, but it would be very helpful to have alumni work involved and have a retrospective look to the success of the supervisory experience in the long term. And we totally agree that metrics for well-being, feeling well throughout the supervisory process are probably too short a thought, and it's a more complex business to come to a full esteem of what the supervisory process did towards a long-term career.
I might just add to that we're mostly signatories of DORA, which means that when we assess research and research performance and so on, it isn't all entirely, by any sense, based on numbers, because numbers can give a very distorted picture. So yes, you need some numbers to evidence things, but at the end, there's quite a lot of subjective and qualitative judgment there as well. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or...
Yeah, I believe the qualitative aspect is so important, and we already do that quite a bit with the teaching, where we have, people who are applying for professorships, writing a teaching assessment. So I believe we could just as well ask for a supervisory assessment, mission statement, I mean, where they talk about what is their view on supervision, what are their tenets, and how have they approached the topic before.
So a very specific question, can you please define metadisciplinary skills? Perhaps you might just say a few words about that, Helke, or one of you.
Metadisciplinary skills is all you need in your backpack when moving on to a next position that is not your topic-specific training and expertise, but the broad range of skills and knowledge that helps for morphing into a next step of career. Be it leadership skills, be it project management, be it knowledge about mental health or open science, all of what's in the basket.
And we decided to use metadisciplinary, which, we could just as well call them transferable, but with metadisciplinary, we wanted to focus also on the important aspects that we have to train our future leaders that are, going out there into an ambiguous world where we don't know how it's going to continue. And so we decided if we use metadisciplinary, we put also this word meta in it, which hopefully opens up the spectrum of the courses that we will train them in.
Yes, I think it goes a little bit beyond transferable and generic skills, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's the point of the term. Okay, a question about, again, a very specific question. One of the messages is separating the process from the thesis evaluation. Please could you confirm that this statement relates to the requirement for supervisors not to be involved in the final examination rather than preventing them from commenting on thesis drafts, this being a key element of doctoral candidates to prepare them in supervision. I'm sure that's what was meant. Yeah,
yeah, it's correct.
Yes, it's just so in the UK we don't allow supervisors to be part of the final examination, but some countries do, and we think that is a bit of a conflict of interest. So we discussed a lot about the rewarding system that recognizes good mentoring practice, but what should institutions do with academics that systematically get involved in bad supervision?
Well, we said something about it also in the paper. We think it's about living rules and regulations. If we see repeated lack of good supervisory practice, there should be repercussions coming from leadership. I think this is about good scientific leadership and acting on good scientific practice rules to make sure that the supervisory process can be maintained and fulfilled by everybody involved. And I do know that there are institutions in the world who take this very seriously and also would ban people from the supervisory process and from having doctoral candidates if there is repeated, let's say, violence of best scientific practice. And we believe that one needs to take this hard bite to live the quality rules that we propose in a stringent way.
Right.
And we also do propose a lot of positive enhancement. So I believe, before maybe there's this more harsh step of penalization, there's always, we hope that we can create and do good by fostering a good culture of appreciation and also training them, coaching them. But then again, we also need to have ways of making sure that certain things are just done properly. And then also the next step would be, if it's really a series of abuse, we need to take care of that in a very stringent way, as Helke said.
Yep. So I might just add a comment to that. We have a process at UCL for stopping supervisors taking PhD students. There is a big challenge with this, that it's a very slow process in identifying poor practice over a significant period of years. So we don't underestimate how difficult this is, but it is possible to put in processes in place, and even just having those processes in place can act as a message. Now, there's a couple of questions about diversity. Just before I go on to those, there's a definition question about define support structures. Could you define what support structures you feel are optimal to best practices in doctoral education? I think I might just say there's quite a lot about that in our previous papers, a little bit more in the paper here, but a lot more in the previous papers. But I don't know if you want to add anything particularly about support structures for supporting supervisors.
Oh, there's all kinds, I believe. So all the institutions have different ways of supporting. For example, at the University of Zurich, we have this leadership development program, and now we have a leadership and governance agency that is really here to support professors in their leadership tasks. So this might be one aspect. But then again, as we also write in the paper, like particular individual coaching might be another aspect. And then, of course, support structures for doctoral candidates is what I'm the head of, right? The graduate campus with all the training offers and mentoring advice stuff. Then we have career services, as Helke said in her presentation bit, and also mental health services, all kinds. We've really, I think in the last 20 years, done a lot to make support structures, to establish them and to make them work. And so I believe there's a lot for doctoral candidates, but there's also a lot for professors and supervisors.
One last,
we built.
Sorry, okay. Yeah.
We likewise at Heidelberg University built the HiTrack Center, a program that starts offering support to late-stage postdocs, so to speak, those who are on the track towards a professorship, or those who are on the step towards starting making career decisions, and there is an intensification with mentoring paths towards a professorship. So I think there is a lot of good programs sprouting, and there is much more coming either out of the graduate centers or also the personnel development centers who take care of career development aspects for later stages of career that then benefit those who are supervised at the early stages of career.
Great. So there are two big questions in here that we might be able to get onto later in the discussion. One is about how we promote diversity in the program. And this second was was one about any recommendations for joint doctorates, but there was a bigger question about, and this will really come up, we need to do more to ensure that good supervision is in place, really requires a cultural change in most universities. How do you practically make this happen? This happen on a practical level? So I think we will be coming to that as part of the discussion, and that was one of my questions that I had in my back pocket if we needed them. Okay, so with that, let's thank Claudine and Helke. They'll be around, of course, for the panel discussions later. But let's move on now. We have 4 invited speakers to have read the paper and to comment on the paper. David Seidel, Marici Nerad, Alexei Moyne, and Zuzana Yitzova. It was a difficult one, that one. So I will introduce them individually, one at a time. David Seidel first, then, is from the University of Zurich. He's a supervisor from the Management Studies Department, and he was the winner of the University of Zurich Mentoring Award just recently. David, over to you. Oh.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here onto this panel. I'm very excited about this panel, particularly as I'm very fond of this paper, and I think it has great ideas, and it's great that we share across different universities, research-intensive universities, some best practices, good practices for supervising PhD students, and in that way sort of trigger a reflection also on how we actually supervise PhD students. I've been a professor and been supervising PhD students for 15 years. And the way I've been supervising over the years has changed. So I myself, when I received my doctoral training, was trained in the traditional way, the apprenticeship model way. I had my professor, my supervisor, and that was it. And I was working close with that supervisor. I benefited a lot from it, and I started off supervising my own PhD students exactly in the same way. And I was also very excited about supervising that way. Now, over the years, things have changed, and that's, I think, and I'll point out 5 points in this paper that for me, myself, as a supervisor is, I found inspiring or sort of reassuring me in things I've been doing in supervising PhD students. I think the most important thing, and that's also how Helke and Claudine ended, is this idea of training a PhD student takes a village. It's a network of supervisors. It's not only you. It's not the old model of you and your supervisee, but it's actually many, and you share and have shared responsibilities. You distribute responsibilities or you divide responsibilities in supervising PhD students, and you have to be aware of the different responsibilities. I think that's very important. To be aware of that and also see your responsibility in sort of managing this network of different supervisors also for your supervisee. Second one, and that was also a second point that they highlighted, is that it takes 2 to tango, and I think that's quite important, and it's not so simple. Actually, it is also that there are responsibilities of the supervisee, and the supervisee also needs to understand his or her responsibilities in this supervisor-supervisee responsibility, and you supervise depending on sort of how the supervisee reacts and how he or she wants to be supervised. It's this reciprocal interdependence as is highlighted in the paper. Third point, transparency and reliable expectation management. I think that's quite important up front. I mean, we have these formal supervision agreements. You do those. Usually it's more of a tick box experience. It's actually more the informal agreement, I think, that is important. It's the lived informal part. What I found very interesting that the paper highlights, which wasn't highlighted here so much, is sort of this systematically facilitating interaction, mutual learning between different PhD students. And also something that I hadn't thought about, okay, also learning from former PhD students, also bringing them in who former PhD students who have their career, who could look back at how they were supervised and sort of learn from that. The PhD students can learn from that, but also you as a supervisor can learn from that when you interact with them. And finally, this continuous skill development. It's not at the beginning you get some training. Actually, I never got any training as a supervisor because it didn't exist in the past, but this systematic and continuous training. So these are maybe the 5 points that I would pick out particularly for myself. Now, in terms of what we can discuss later on in particular, this is an interesting paper, but it has to be implemented. And implementing means change management. And change management is one of the things that I teach and do research on. Partly it's one of the areas. And so maybe one of the important things is, if you want to put this in practice, I think one of the levers of doing this is making visible and show appreciation for supervisory work. I mean, if we take the UZH, I mean, we are supervising, but it doesn't have so much visibility. And we have started at the UZH to give more visibility to supervisory work by having this mentoring award. This mentoring award, maybe it doesn't matter so much who wins it. It's actually by having this award, it sort of signals, okay, this is something that we value. That's something that's important. That's something where you can better or not so good and so on. That's something you can work on. Second one I briefly want to comment on is this mandatory elements. And I think that's something that the group has discussed a lot and so on, and we might continue discussing it. I mean, this making things mandatory is a touchy issue, particularly since many people have been supervising PhD students for many years, have been successfully supervising it. Now, if you introduce mandatory things, it sort of can signal, okay, we don't appreciate what you have done in the past, or it wasn't that good. And even some old style supervision is not always bad. I mean, it could have worked well, and the question is always, when do you change things? So I think it's a good idea to provide support and suggest certain measures, but not making mandatory for those who are already there. And the point is, okay, if it's part of onboarding, if you're joining a new institution, then it's okay. But for the rest, I think it's good to keep it voluntary. But, and that's what I found very interesting, the lever for change is actually the current PhD students. Yeah, the PhD students of today are the supervisors of tomorrow. And I think that's a key point, a very interesting thing. I mean, what we talked about, or what you talked about, and what we'll talk about, is this means cultural change in the in many universities. In the UZH, my university, it will be a cultural change, and this is also a somewhat slow process. And so one of the triggers here is, or one of the levers would be actually to start with those who receive supervision, who will be supervised in the future. And last point, just briefly, I think it's important that, and you signal this in the paper clearly, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. We have different universities, different national institutional structures that are very different. I received my PhD in the UK, and that's a very different system from Switzerland. And I think we have to keep these guidelines or rules or standards or whatever you want to call them flexible, and signal that they are flexible. I think the key point is being reflective about good practice elsewhere, and to what extent can this be applied or needs to be adjusted to the structures that we have in place. And with this, I think I stop, and I look forward to discussing some of the points or some of the questions with the whole panel and the audience later on.
Thank you, David. Great. So our second responder then is Marisi Nerad. Marisi is Emeritus Professor of Higher Education at the University of Washington in Seattle. And she's director of the Center for Innovation and Research in Graduate Education, is what I often call the doyenne of this field. So we're very grateful to have Marisi with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm also honored to be here. And I want to start really complimenting the authors and the contributor to the paper. As you heard, I'm an expert in university research, and particularly in doctoral education worldwide. So I've read a lot, reviewed and seen, but these LERU guidelines are truly holistic because they have a concept, how they view doctoral education and the doctoral researcher as future leaders in all sectors of relevant to society. And what I love how they say, regarding it a privilege to supervise talented doctoral researcher and a duty to contribute to the development of the person, the research person, and the research project output. And seeing it as a shared responsibility, and not just between the two, but as often said, also the institution and the institutional learning environment. So it's 3. And in addition, what I want to compliment the authors and policy members to is they really coined a very meaningful term, which was new to me, the work-life integration, pinpointing really the level of incompatibility when we always talk about work and life balance. Okay, I want to highlight here 3 points. One, which Heike already started to look at it, and that is the report ended with saying it takes a village to raise a PhD. Now, I argue it takes a global village to educate a PhD, because our current and future researchers are required more and more to cross disciplinary, national, institutional, cultural boundaries. And so they must be equipped for multiple environments, and within be trained and educated in multiple learning communities. And I want to emphasize, in the 1980s, we started to really go away and thinking from learning as an individualized concept, independent of context. Now we're thinking and speak far more of theories of situated learning, and that is one view learning as a function of activity, context, and culture in which we learn and are situated. So I think that's 5 levels on the doctoral education, which I see in this. And if you want to know more about, you can ask me later about this. And I want to really emphasize that global village, that means we need to make sure that our doctoral researchers go to the national academic meetings, international conference, are involved in collaboration, joint degrees, and always activities which go beyond the boundaries of just a single academic institution. My second point I want to highlight, it's really important to undertake research, and not only back of the envelope service, if some say, within one's own university on the effect of undertaking a climate change activities about this doctoral supervising and mentoring. And this includes, as also the report said, first, the traditional thing, we need time to doctoral degree completion rates, and I hope most LERU university can now have that because they register them from the very beginning, right? But then also just with number statistical prestigious awards, which our ECR got. Important supervisor-supervisee ratio, and this was also mentioned in the paper. And for example, and I will give later also concrete example from the University of California, Berkeley, where I was for 15 years the director of graduate research. We established that not more than 9 supervisees a supervisor should have. And we looked at the neighboring, we of course always look at our Stanford, and they had just 4 supervisees to 1 supervisor. So you really have to think about that. We also think it's very important when I say about research, exit surveys, which when they complete their dissertation and file it, where inquires about satisfaction with the supervision, but equally important, career path information 2 years later, 5 years later, when most people are out finished with the postdoc, to see what happened with the careers and feed it back to the current doctoral researcher that they know what is possible in their different disciplines. Very important. But also this information is the base for policy setting. And I will then tell you where and how to do it, how we did it, not how you do it. You need to know. And on the qualitative research side, focus groups, for example, which we undertook, right, is that the doctoral researcher, among doctoral researchers as well as supervisors, we found, for example, that the doctoral researcher would not tell their supervisor that they really don't want to become professors. And why? Except in the field of engineering, that's fine. Why? They fear they will be not seen as smart enough to be professors, or maybe they're seen less worthy to get nominated for that prestigious fellowship or research assistantship or teaching assistantship or so on. Now, among supervisors, which we've found is it surfaced in the focus group, this very dicey topic, which is not discussed among them, to distinguish between what means being collegial and having a different opinion on quality standards in the connection with the dissertation of a colleague supervisees. Now that is something I think qualitative research will bring, and it will be wonderful to bring these back. So here I come to my last point, telling what, from my own experience, and I think some successfully activities to change institutional culture and behavior, and that was at University of California, Berkeley. And I want to say it took us 10 years to really see effects of all of that. So one thing we did, and we, when I say, was the Graduate Dean and Vice Chancellor or Vice President of Research, which is one and the same person. So we offered a monthly invitational supervisor luncheon seminar. People always love to come when it's free food and good food and a nice environment. So this invitation became personally from the Vice Chancellor to maximum 40 people. And we learned in the process it's best to invite always 2 people from a department. And we kind of had like departments which we thought are really quite good and some who can learn something. So we invited the chair of the department, and if they have a person with a professor responsible for doctoral education or someone senior respected professor, because then what is discussed in the seminar will be brought back to the department. And what we brought there is the results of the research findings internally in the institution, and we discussed them. And we learned also, we often invited an institution where the one you are in like to be compared to. So we invited whatever, Stanford, Harvard, MIT, a person in the high rank to take up one of the topics which we found in our research and discuss it. So that is kind of, we had a trial balloon within that seminar, and together with the professors, the supervisors, we start thinking and developing possible policy. Second, implementation of cultural change, what we did. And similarly, in the LERU paper, it's also mentioned, we really set up an advisory group of the professional administrative staff. Often they have a PhD also, like here I know very well the German scene, but also in other universities. And these people we invited to monthly seminars for 6 months and discussed, and what would you think if we have such a policy? How would you implement that in your discipline, in your department? What would be hurdles? How could we find modes of climbing these hurdles? So that was something which was very useful, and we showed in terms of appreciation for the administrative professional staff. We had an annual big party in a really wonderful environment with dancing and all kinds of door prizes. Now, the third one is really inviting the doctoral researcher also to buy monthly focus group for 3 months. And so what we did there, we guided them through discussing I would say at least 3 till 4 phases of a doctoral study. you call it onboarding, the orientation, the dissertation proposal refining, really the dissertation research and field work or whatever, and then preparing for the final, the writing, publishing, but also thinking about the next career, the next step. And in this way, we learned what various different institutes, departments had in place. And the doctoral researcher could say, wow, public health is this, why don't we have that? But we also collected the information and put out a guide to departmental good activities, which often doesn't cost anything, because of our humanities department would say, oh, we are so poor, but engineering has lots of money. And most of the time it was not an issue of money. So in this meeting, we got then also from the students and from the staff, and you see from the supervisors and professors, really advice. And lastly, I want to talk to that what was brought up, this co-supervisory team and mandatory workshops. Now, in the LERU guideline, and as before, our authors said they would recommend for new supervisors, junior professors, to have a mandatory team. And I must say, at my current university, the University of Washington in Seattle, we had a whole week of new people, new professors who come involved in all kinds of thinking. It was a wonderful network. And so we accepted that we had to do these workshops, and we loved it, actually. We got to know each other. So these kinds of new workshops also formed collaboration with others. I would never thought about it with the geography department and so on. Now, we also don't allow that both in Berkeley and at the University of Washington, that new supervisors in the first 2 years, unless they have been elsewhere, but really new assistant professors, are not main supervisors. They are on the team and they learn being for 2 years co-supervisors, but not the main. And they're given aside a professor, a supervisor, mentoring team to whom they can come, but the team also needs to check in. Sometimes assistant professors don't dare saying, oh, I need help, but the other way around. And we implemented a face-to-face meeting, at least annually, with 2 of the supervisors. And of course, our lab sciences professors would say, annually, we meet every week, what do you mean? But some of the humanities said, really? So, and we require after the face-to-face meeting, a report which said what has been achieved and what are the next steps. So this is what I want to emphasize, and the 5-year refresher workshop on new policies or official practices, and because they're changed, is quite useful and a nice idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. Lots of good practice there to put forward. So let's move on. Our next speaker is Alexei Moin. Alexei is a doctoral candidate at the University of Helsinki in folklore studies, but he's also chair of the committee overseeing doctoral researchers at the University of Helsinki. Alexei.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here and to give the doctoral researchers' perspective also on supervision in this panel. And I would also like to join Marcy in the compliments to the paper for this really holistic approach to supervision. So a couple of points that I would like to focus on in my own speech now that remind a lot of what David and Marcy have said already. I think the first one is probably the importance of this individual experience that the PhD project is as well for the supervisee as for the supervisor, and that it's quite important to be aware of the rights and duties of both supervisor and supervisor. So all the risk that as it said, it takes two to tango, so that each and everyone in this relationship are aware of their responsibilities in this journey that the PhD is. So of course, as it is a hierarchical relationship in most cases, it can be difficult for the supervisee to be aware of their rights and to fight for them, to defend them in cases where there are problems within the supervising relationship. And at the University of Helsinki, what has been implemented in the past few years for all doctoral researchers, regardless of their field and faculty, is the supervision agreement and the thesis committee that are well, formal agreements and that are followed on the so-called TESSA platform on the internet. It is now mandatory for every doctoral researcher to have a thesis committee and to sign this supervision agreement with their supervisors, which is important, although it takes time, especially for humanities and social sciences, where this practice is very new, to understand the importance of such agreements. So I think having this formal agreement, although it might seem a bit tedious for when it is a new practice, has the good thing of this agreement is that it permits the discussion of roles of supervisors and supervisees in the relationship, and that supervisors might then also be aware of their own expectations and what they need from the relationship. So yeah, the expectation management that was highlighted in the paper is something that I like to stress also here. Of course, there are guidelines for this supervision agreement that the Association of Doctoral Researchers of the University have made and that are available to every doctoral researcher at the university. And of course, there are some issues as it is, well, a new practice, and there are lots of different practices according to faculties and disciplines. And I think mostly when issues arise, it's when the supervisees or the doctoral researcher doesn't know about these agreements, about what are their rights. And I think, yeah, bringing this to their awareness is really important in the beginning, like in the first stages of the doctoral journey. And then as well, we've been talking about training for supervisor and for supervisees about the supervision practices. I think that would be a very efficient for everyone to know about best practices in general, and that the work of supervision would be recognized is also very, very important. Also in terms of resources and time allocated to supervisors for the supervision, as well, in many cases, there are lots of duties that professors who have many doctoral researchers under their supervision. So they have many duties alongside supervision, which can sometimes conflict also with a good supervision. So yeah, there's also this question of resources that I would like to highlight, as it is a wider issue, I would say, in academia in general, and especially in humanities, for funding research and yeah, academia in general. So I will finish here, and I thank you once again.
Thank you, Alexei. Great. And our fourth panelist is Susanna Zhitsova, as he is doing his best. Susanna is a newish supervisor. She's at the Charles University in Prague, at the Charles University Hospital. His field is immunotherapy, and she's going to talk to us from the supervisory perspective. Susanna.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful event. It's a great honor to be a part of this panel discussion. I read this excellent paper presenting the key challenges of supervision, and I would like to share with you several ideas from the paper by implementing them into how we do it at Charles University and what are the problems that we still need to overcome. So Charles University, as you probably know, is one of the oldest universities in the world and currently offers over 200 doctoral study programs at 17 faculties. The standard length of the study is 3 to 4 years, and most of the PhD positions are funded. At Charles University, to get enrolled in a PhD program, the students are first interviewed by a potential future supervisor. And when they are selected by a supervisor, they usually need to pass an oral exam in front of a PhD committee where they present their proposed project. I would say that this is the part also from the paper where the realistic expectation management takes place, because the PhD committee at the very beginning of the PhD study, they make sure that both the supervisor and the PhD student are fully aware of all the potentially problematic aspects of the PhD. Then when you're studying, you end your PhD with thesis defense, and the supervisor, as it was discussed today before, the PhD supervisor is not involved in the final evaluation of the thesis, which I think is also a good point from the paper. I'm currently a supervisor of 3 PhD students, and of one of whom will defend his thesis in the upcoming months. And before that, I served mainly as co-supervisor consultant. It is right of every PhD student to pick their own second supervisor who serves as an independent consultant. So I think this is a great opportunity for young supervisors to train their skills, because they can be a co-supervisor before they become the real supervisors. I definitely agree with the paper that being a supervisor is a privilege. It is very inspiring to work with young doctoral researchers, but also it's a great responsibility. So I would say, while it's very rewarding to see the professional growth of your PhD students, it's also our duty to ensure that all our PhD students have the opportunity to learn all aspects of scientific work, maybe working with cohorts or creation of data analysis, publishing, presenting at conferences, and collaborating with different researchers. Currently, I think at Charles University, there are many well-functioning services, such as support staff at each faculty, helping PhD students with administration and providing answers to general questions such as deadlines or funding options. And there are also many educational programs, funding and travel options for PhD students. However, there are several things that I believe that should be changed, or we need to at least talk about them. And these are also the key points of the paper. And this is, I would say, firstly, no training for supervision and leadership skills. And I would say some supervisors might not be natural in communications, and there's absolutely no rule for them to learn these soft skills, which are very important for supervision. There's also no maximum number of PhD students for supervisor. There's a maximum recommended number of 3, but it's not a rule, so you can have as much PhD students as you want. There's no functional evaluation of PhD supervisors, so you actually have no idea whether the previous PhD students were satisfied and happy with the supervisor. And lastly, I would say, as the paper also says, being a supervisor is a very demanding leadership task. I agree. However, it's often very overlooked by the employer and the general public. So this is my last point. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So we're starting to get some questions but I wonder whether any of the panel, so let's bring back Claudine and Helke, thank you. Any of the panel wish to comment on their colleagues in some way? Let's not go on the supervisor training one because there's a specific question on that, but has anybody got any immediate comments? David.
Yeah, maybe I could just ask a question. I mean, Alexi emphasized very much, and Susanna also sort of emphasized this supervisory agreement at the beginning. And I wonder, this formal agreement, how important this formal agreement is. Because in my own experience, okay, a lot of this agreement is sort of more in the informal part. I mean, we have the formal side, but how much can you put into that? And particularly in my area, often sort of the agreement, what we agree on, I mean, we can agree on in principle that there are different ways of doing it. And often students, PhD students, only realize later on what they want to do exactly, how it is. I mean, I do qualitative research. Often my research question only comes after I've started my research. And I find it similarly in many PhD studies. They start the studies and then on the way they discover sort of what direction they want to take and so on. And that also means I would supervise them in different ways. So what I do up front in terms of expectation management and so on, I can say, okay, depending on whether you are aiming for an academic career or a career in the industry or whatever, I could teach, I could supervise you in different ways. So I was wondering to what extent this sort of formal agreement at the beginning, how helpful that is in your experience, because you emphasized this as sort of a key part, and I felt like, okay, it's an important part, but we kind of work it out on the way. Yeah.
Alexi, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I'm happy to comment. So, this formal agreement is in the beginning, but then it needs also to be updated according to the rules at the university every year at least, so that we can change what has been decided in the first agreement. And I think what is important in the fact that it's formal is that it helps really raising awareness that it's important to talk about the way we want to be supervised and we want to supervise. So in the end, what counts more than the formal agreement is probably like the informal work that is the supervision relationship. But then it's just that it allows to highlight maybe the importance of having talks and deciding together what the doctoral researcher wants of their PhD studies, and how the supervisor then is able also to conduct the supervision.
Yeah. Anybody else want to make a comment on this? I might make a comment myself that I hear what you're saying, because in fact at UCL we have this sort of online monitoring system so that you can, there's a code of practice, but you can revise these things at 6-monthly intervals precisely because of that, because these things do change. But it still helps to have this, from what I hear, we don't do it ourselves, but this, you know, an agreement right at the start that just sets some basic ground rules. But Marisi.
Yes, kind of building on what Susanna presented and right now about this agreement, we have also the structure, the co-ed or the advising structure that specifically in the humanities, social science, professional schools, in the beginning, a temporary supervisor will be given. And after a year or so, two, when they know really and finalize what is the dissertation topic and what direction are they taking, and having done some research, then just what Susanna said, will be an oral exam with the supervisor they choose because of their specific topic. And I think in this way, then followed up by an annual, you could say agreement, but an annual meeting where a report is, which is monitored, that you can say, this is what you did, that's what I wanted to do. And both the two supervisors at least look it over, maybe a combination of the both approach, because indeed in the very beginning, they don't know, or they may go in a different direction.
Okay. But you're on mute.
Yes, I very much like your question, David, as you put it, because it points so much to the potential and the value of this paper. And yeah, there is a difference between the potential and the value. And I think, Alexi, you made that very clear. It needs updates so it lives. So I see it rather as a catalyst for the expectation management process I alluded to earlier. And in that sense, it bears some characteristics of a walking stick. It's great to have it to get the process going, but if we don't live this piece of paper, it remains one of a piece of papers piling up somewhere. So it's good to get started, but you need to get started in terms of doing something about it. If it only sits on the desk, it's useless.
Alexi.
Yeah, I would like also to add a quick comment that it's, I think it helps also in terms of protection of the doctoral researcher in case some problems arise, so that like if there's a problem with the supervisor, then if they have signed this agreement in the beginning, then they might also realize that, oh, I have a problem, so I need to, so I have this, I mean, I can say that even though the contract is not really binding that much, they can still like refer to it with the thesis committee, for instance. So I think it's kind of a, gives the feeling of being protected somehow to the doctoral researcher.
Right. So I think we might move into, I might pick out a couple of the questions, two in particular, but I'm going to start with one that's particularly around training. We've recognized that this mandatory point, we hear what people say, that I think the mandatory point is really for the new entries. We've had this at UCL for a long time, and it does sweep through the institution fairly quickly, so that you've got there is an issue about how you refresh people and so on and so forth. But I see new entrants to the university very hungry, let's say, for training of this sort. I don't really see the mandatoriness is a problem at all in my institution. But there were some questions around, there was one about, why do we think that supervisors, we want to be the best in their field, but they don't, and so they're happy to do training in their field, but somehow it's not the same for supervisory practice. There seems to be some sort of resistance. As I say, I don't see this resistance in new staff, but it is certainly there for old staff, and it is a certain element of a tradition in academia that somehow we don't need to be trained anymore because we're somehow experts. And then part of this is then, Marisi mentioned her supervisor luncheons, you're then reaching out to the converted, but not necessarily to the more problematic end of the institution. I don't know whether somebody wants to comment on these. And also, actually, there was a third element to this. What constitutes practically, how long should it be? For onboarding sections, a week length was mentioned, but maybe, I mean, it's much shorter than that for us. It's a sort of half day, but You know, I don't know whether Marcy, you want to comment on these training elements. Marcy? Or David? You can go first.
I mean, I can just start off. I think the problem is a cultural thing that that we are evaluated typically on our scientific achievements, and sort of often we see ourselves as, okay, we are researchers, and as part of it, sort of, but that's just a side issue. We are also training others. Yeah. So in that sense, maybe it also means a change in our in the understanding our or an identity change. I mean, we are also educators of others and trainers of others, and I think that comes back to this appreciation. I mean, if it's appreciated how you supervise PhD students, and our institution, it's not that appreciated, not so visible yet, and that's why we see it sort of as a side issue. And I mean, there's also always a trade-off, sort of how much of my time and energy do I put into research-related activities, and how much do I put into sort of teaching-related or supervisory-related activities. In that sense, I think the key point is showing that this is an important part of your role, and it is also appreciated and visible. And I think that's why we have shown some resistance, because this is a side issue, and because it's a side issue, as it's often seen, we don't see that, okay, we can, if we're good researchers, we can do that as well. That's sort of the assumption, often the old style assumption, and we need to change sort of the mindset that this is an important part, and this needs to be trained, and it's also valued, and it's normal to get that you need to be trained.
Yeah, so this is a key message from the paper about, you know, the evaluation of the supervisory process as well. You know, at the end, we produce, you know, one of the key outputs of research is papers, patents, and data, of course, but people is a key output of the research process, and that is not sufficiently well recognized and rewarded. Marcy.
Yes, therefore, I think a double positive outcome of an early workshop, or I would really say it as a week, where teaching for new professors is emphasized, and introduced will be teaching evaluation and so on, and how that goes into, I mean, the US is there quite maybe rigid into your assessment of teaching, then research, how to get grants and that all, but then explain also the supervision part, and explain that this is part also how you assess, and therefore how you, that there is a prize, and that you, an award, and that is very special, and the university makes a very special, wonderful ceremony around it. So if the new professors, new supervisors learn it right in the beginning in this context, teaching research service to the profession and supervision, then it becomes very soon culture of the institution.
Susanna, I think, wanted to say something.
No, I agree.
Oh, yeah, okay. Any more? Helke.
I'm very grateful for the question, because it points to the heart of what we try to say in the paper. And I'd like to flip the coin and ask, like, define excellence. Yes, it's all about excellence, but does excellence stop at the level of how we treat the people we work with? I think it doesn't. We are all in agreement that best scientific practice procedures entail how we do with others. And so I think our appreciation and understanding of the word excellence may need a refinement if we only refer by the excellence of our doings to the excellence of the research output.
Indeed. Marcy, you wanted to add something?
I wanted to add, in the paper were also two good examples. I think it was the University of Helsinki and Edinburgh, maybe. Really the pedagogical aspect of supervision. That really needs to be understood. People learn differently, and a supervisor needs to understand that there are different learning styles. And this can be also in the beginning package. And we have now so much more research about brain research and learning and the connection. So we really have good reasons why we bring this together and bring this to our young supervisors. Or
It's it's a very specific question here, Marisi, that answers to that. Do you have any recommendations to who should train supervisors? It takes a lot of time to absorb the enormous quantity of research papers on doctoral supervision and doctoral training, so experienced researchers might not have the time to be up to date with the research.
Okay, I think that's why I said, you know, to have researchers on this topic, but also now, at least I learned in Germany, there are lots of people who do coaching and leadership, and they can be, but what we have done in these workshops, in the beginning workshops, we included senior supervisors to tell about their experience. So we always have a section, what are common problems? And then we do a role play, for example, say, think of a really difficult supervisee, and you play the supervisor and you tell them what's the supervisee like, being passive aggressive or being super polite, and you know, so all kinds, and then dealing with this. So I think there are people who do, and we have some also colleagues, David, Beate, Scholz, and others, and many of the, like Heike, the graduate schools, or Claudine, know people who are very good in this, know academia, and then involve senior supervisors, so they feel also they are useful.
Claudine.
Yes, well, we've made very good experiences with that kind of mix that Marisi just alluded to. So on the one hand, we have a person who's in higher education research herself, and she writes on supervision. She's a little bit of a researcher herself, but she's also a trainer and a coach by training. So she kind of reunites those two aspects. And I think even though sometimes you have a trainer who's not really into the whole research on higher education and supervision, you might still benefit, because a lot is also about just the regular things like how do you give constructive feedback, and how do you reflect on your own practices, and then how Marisi said you take case studies and you talk about how you would react to a particular case like that. I believe you could even go without having someone who's really knowledgeable about all the research out there.
Great. So Alexei, then I want to move it on because there's a rather big.
Yeah. So I just wanted to highlight that in the University of Helsinki, there's the Central Center for University Pedagogy Training that organizes training for all staff of the university, and there's a course on supervision that is, I think, the fourth one, like a 5-credit course. And what is good in that course that I haven't taken yet, of course, is that there's really a hands-on approach, and that the like teachers of the course are researchers in higher education or like pedagogy, and so they follow also supervision sessions, so that you can get feedback from like the way you supervise, and so I think if the training is kind of individualized, it might also be more attractive and more interesting for supervisors than a very abstract and general training of one afternoon.
Thanks. So I want to move to a sort of much bigger question that came in before. I very much agree universities need to do more to ensure that good supervision is in place. This requires cultural change in most universities. How do you make this happen on a practical level? I've been doing this for a long time. We within LERU have large doctoral populations. We've got 8,000 at UCL, and yet still doctoral education is often rather low on the agenda of our universities. Susanna mentioned it before. So how are we going to what suggestions might you have about really driving this sort of change at a practical level? I've got lots of thoughts myself on that, but I think I want to hear from the others. who wants to go first? David.
I can just start and maybe picking up on some of the things that have been said before. I think a lot of it is also on the formal side. As Marese said, I mean, organizing these luncheons, something like that, where you bring supervisors together to raise awareness of, I mean, this is an issue that is not, you're not born a supervisor, you actually have to train, you have to sort of constantly think about it, engage with it, learn about new things. I think raising awareness of it through such things like luncheons and so on. I think, and the second thing that has been highlighted before is sort of making supervision visible and making it visible that it's being appreciated through awards, like the University of Zurich just introduced this award, as I mentioned before, and so I think a lot of it is on the more informal side. And typically we have these cultural changes. I mean, culture change cannot be imposed, cannot be mandated, but sort of has to be lived in some way. So I think these things sort of can sort of spark things off. And then, of course, there are other more formal aspects like these trainings and so on that can also sort of, or these formulated visions and so on that can sort of trigger things. So maybe just as a starting point.
Marisi.
Yeah, as I said in the seminars, maybe I said it then. So we put together departments where we think they're quite good things. For example, we learned that the Berkeley department in biochemistry, it's the professors who need to explain and defend themselves why the doctoral candidate took 7-8 years. In the biochemistry, it would be 5-6 years, and not the student. So it's really a culture in that department which is highly appreciated. Also, the culture what they have is of lab rotation. Of course, that would be not in the social science or humanities, but these kind of pairing them together with some department where we think, oh, they could really learn something. And you as graduate dean or you as vice chancellor for researcher are not the police, but professors, supervisors on the same level tell each other what they're doing is, we found to be very effective.
Claudine.
So on the one hand, we do talk about this in the paper a little bit, but it's really one of the difficult points. How do we bring about that cultural change? And I believe, as David said, it's very important it comes from the bottom, but also we need some buy-in from management. So there needs to be this, also university management needs to be behind this idea and want to implement at least part of it, because otherwise it won't really happen. Even though it will happen, at least in my institution, it will happen federalistically differently in different faculties, but it still needs to have some kind of guidance from above. And then something else, you also said that, David Seidel, in your first remarks, so that you said the cultural change is happening with PhD candidates we're training. And also at the University of Zurich, we have been training postdocs in supervision for quite some years now. So we need to focus, I believe, on the younger generation and give them the good bits and hope that then they take it with them to the new institution that they're going to. And so hopefully from there, it needs both the bottom up and the top down.
Yeah. Okay.
I fully agree to everything Claudine said. I would like to add a further angle to it. I think there is no one-fits-all supervisory training the further a career has matured. And I think to have a more variable offer for individual coaching, not necessarily sitting in a classroom, but making an offer towards targeting areas where people feel like, here I could do with an expert who helps me to improve some challenges of my day-to-day life, so I can free up also time for the supervisory part. I think the neglect of supervision is not necessarily a result of a mean decision. It's rather like bending under the pressure of the many topics available. And if there is a sign from leadership within the university, we are here to support you on the broadest possible level to take or to ease some of the burden that is part of your day-to-day job. And that could be helped not by sitting in a class to learn about the theory of supervision, but it could be helped by having trainer sessions with you that help you to tackle some of the challenges you experience on a day-to-day level. Then you would free up energy and probably time to be a better version of yourself in the supervisory process. And I think these are the different options of support that can be offered on the various levels of career.
Marcy.
I want to give another example, and I think, David, maybe you said or something, which is important to have also some financial incentives from the top administration university there. Example, we did the Grado Dean, which also the Vice Chancellor for Research, and one visited every month a different department and brought to the department the departmental data we had, information on them, and gave it to them compared to, let's take, it was sociology, compared to political science and to all of social sciences, what they see, how are they different. And let the sociology chair and whole faculty say, what's the problem here? And then have some money, financial sources, for example, then come up. It's often the dissertation fellowship, they never finish at that year, but obviously a year afterwards. So we had then a dissertation final fellowship year grant, which then the department got. And indeed, we could see over time, they really finished then. And it was like, you know, an incentive to go up, that we understand there are issues, here's something. But then after some years, we want to see some results.
Great. Yeah, I think the financial element has not come out enough. It's frequently, you know, you talk about doctoral support for doctoral candidates, and they say, oh, we give all this money for stipends, and we give all this money for supervising, and you know, and we've got an administrator, but this sort of core budget for training and support is often rather hard to get out of the priority setting, you know, when money will go to a new building or a new program or even the existing programs. But I just wanted to add, I'll come back to Susanna in a second. I did want to bring in Alexei, because we talked about the top down from Claudine and the bottom up from everybody as well. But the one bottom up element that I think is really important is empowering the candidates themselves. You know, we need to hear more of their voice in this. I don't know whether Alexei wants to comment on that.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. Well, I don't know if Susanna wants to say something before, maybe because she's been raising her hand for quite some time.
Susanna.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking about all these important things that need to be implemented in the clinical practice, and there are definitely several models. I would say universities are quite huge entities, so maybe the level of faculty is quite doable, and I think this is the place where the supervisors and PhD students can quite easily gather together and promote the discussion on supervision. My question to all the other speakers was, do you think there's also a role for media? I would say public media, because according to the paper, there are a lot of awards given on universities for supervision. Were these awards, for example, shown in the media and stuff like that? Do you think it's important to talk with the general public as well?
Anybody want to comment? I know that the Times Higher Ed has such an award, and that does get a bit of coverage. Claudine.
So actually, David Seidel is the first of our UCH Mentoring Award winners, and we now did it the second year this year. The thing is, media is not really interested in that, unfortunately. I mean, our internal university media did promote the event and the award. That was really nice. But then to imagine that one of the large newspapers from Zurich will be reporting on that, they are actually looking for all the different harassments and misconduct cases, not the good practices, unfortunately. That's my experience.
Marcy.
A wonderful example I learned is the Goethe University in Frankfurt, who have since quite a while the Best Supervisor Award, and they invite the public media, but they also found a foundation who sponsors and gives money for the award, and also so the sponsors who fund other events or other awards too are there. So they're already public, and then the media comes. So that is really done quite well. And I want one other point, what Alexa put to the peer community of students. I think if universities really introduce the cohort-based model, that means that doctoral students can, researchers start out together at the same time and go through the phases, they can become a peer support group, but also they can share each other's content knowledge, advise each others on studies. And what is very important in those I call them library-based studies who do not have a lab, to have a common workspace. And that is where you can exchange and where you meet and you go for lunch. And that it really then works as a peer advisory support.
Last comment from Alexei, because we need to wind it up just briefly.
Yeah, so thank you, Manashi, for bringing these up. I think they are really interesting points. As doctoral researchers are often quite isolated and do not know that many of their fellow researchers. So what we've been doing also at the University of Helsinki is that we founded an organization, an association that is open to all doctoral researchers, and I think it is this community building that we are doing, and organizing also surveys on well-being or harassment at the workplace, or any bigger issues like that, that we can then work together with the administration, for instance, and bring up some issues that are relevant to the university. So yeah, I wouldn't stress enough the importance of community between doctoral researchers. In short.
Great. Thank you all very much. You know, to the answer to how we get culture change, the answer is there isn't a silver bullet. There are lots of things. We've got the top down, we've got the bottom up from the supervisors, from the candidates themselves. We've got financial incentives, we've got monitoring incentives, we've got professionalization, training. All of these things play a part. As I always say, it's a journey. Things are not going to change overnight. This takes some time. We have reformed doctoral education, as Claudine said, in the last 15, 20 years, quite significantly, certainly in Europe and to some extent across the world. And this now, I think, needs a change in a greater professionalization of doctoral supervision, and a greater, you know, it is a privilege, as it says in the paper. And one of the reasons I do this job, because I think it's the most satisfying thing we do as academics, training candidates who then go out. This is the other point that Claudine was making. They do go out to the world. You know, lots of the world see us training PhDs just for ourselves. Actually, they don't. They mostly go out and they drive innovation in society. And somehow we need to get that message out more clearly. Anyway, with that, I'll thank all our speakers and our panel today. Claudine, Helke, Susanna, Marisi, David, and Alexei. And I will pass you back to Kurt for some final words.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you all for this fantastic 2 hours, I would say. I'm very glad to see, as Secretary General of LERU, that again, as this is mostly the case, fortunately, that the reactions to the paper are very positive, that the analysis that we have made within the group and the recommendations that we have been putting forward in the paper are fully supported and shared. So this is always very good to see. We are 23 universities, but okay, there are many more out there, but it's always good to see that we can pinpoint really the real issues and try to come up with a number of recommendations. And the discussion has also shown this morning that at the end of the day, as it is in many cases and on many issues, it's all about people. It is about the supervisors. It is about the doctoral students. It is about supporting staff. It is about the leadership of our institutions. And I fully share this bottom-up and top-down approach that we need on the topic. Claudine and Helge have referred to the discussion that they had at the Rectors' Assembly in Zurich, where they presented the paper to the rectors for approval. And I must say that I was very pleased there to see also the very big support that the rectors gave to the paper. And that means that we hope, of course, that this will lead at the end of the day to the leadership of our institutions taking the lead and promoting what we put in this paper, like we do in many other cases in many other topics. And it's clear that it cannot only be a bottom-up initiative, but there must be support top-down on this matter, because at the end of the day, as David just mentioned, this is really our core business. We train the people, we train the leaders of the future, and that's what our full attention has to go through, be it in person, be it through financial support, be it in all kinds of other ways, that we can make sure that at the end of the day, all those people that we train in our institutions get into this sustainable career inside or outside the university. So again, I hope that LERU here can be, as always, leading by example and inspiring many other institutions out there to take the same approach as we take within the LERU institutions. I just want to wrap up by thanking everybody involved here today. In the first place, of course, Helge and Claudine once again for all the tremendous work that I have been doing on this paper, the Doctoral Studies Group, David and his leadership in this group. Also today in presenting this paper, I would like to thank the panel members, all the participants out there, and last but not least, I would say my own staff at the LERU office, who have done a great job in putting all of this here together. Francesca, Esther in particular, who have been organizing this event in a very nice and effective way. I just would like to ask your attention as a kind of final point that with LERU we are going to put out also in the following weeks and months other new papers on other important topics. Next month we will launch our new paper on interdisciplinarity, which is a kind of follow-up of a paper that we did 5 years ago, but where we are now going to check what have our institutions done with regard to creating interdisciplinary approaches in the research and in the teaching that we are doing within LERU universities. It illustrates once again that we don't only publish papers with big recommendations and ideas, but that we also follow up to what extent that our member universities are implementing then those papers within their own institutions. And then a month later, somewhere around Easter, I think, we will present a new paper on academic freedom, also one of those very hot and important issues nowadays, and see what is the state of affairs with regard to the protection of academic freedom in Europe and beyond. So on this note, I would like to thank all of you very much for this very interesting morning, and I hope that we will meet again at another LERU occasion. Thank you very much.